So the people who haven't got time, you will never, ever move forward unless you make time to think strategically. Impossible. So if you're just doing the sausage machine, you're going to be turning that handle forever. And you're going to get the same chipolatas coming out the end of it, or whatever the vegan equivalent is.
So, hi everybody, welcome to the Build Smart Blueprint. So I'm really happy to introduce Tim. So Tim Fitch is the owner and director of Invent, a management consultancy that really focuses on helping construction companies unlock growth through innovation, operational efficiency, and also business development. So Tim is a bit of a geek, I would say, when it comes to all things scaling your business. Much like us, he likes cold calls. He likes doing outreach. Likes actively trying to grow your business rather than just waiting for the phone to ring. Would that be a fair comment, Tim?
Yeah, I think if you're in the mindset of waiting for the phone to ring, your kids are going to get thinner.
That's a good way. That's a good way to put it. Tim, could you give us a bit of a history of like how Invent came about and how I know you guys at the company focus on a few different sectors, but construction is one of the main sectors that you service. But I'd love to kind of understand a little bit more about the history of how that came about.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so Invent in its sort of current form uh, was started just over 13 years ago, September 2011. Prior to that, I'd had a longish corporate career in construction. I started off life as a civil engineer working for a well-known foundations business. I did that for a long time. Ended up uh, doing a lot of work in and around railway infrastructure, particularly embankments and cuttings. That was a subcontractor. I then left that and moved into a business development role for the largest contractor in Europe and focused on the infrastructure market in the UK. And it was there that I was 100% focused in on BD rather than before. I was doing basically I was running an operational team as well as some BD work. But then I went 100% into BD and took a business which was turning about 45 million a year to 250 million in 4 or 5 years. And then that business was bought by what is now Vinci. And so that 200 million, 250 million business was predominantly railways. I then moved into other infrastructure sectors, including energy, renewables, nuclear decommissioning, water and roads. And I did that for a number of years and then decided I was quite good at that. And therefore I wanted to do my own thing. So I left and with my business partner, Brendan Morahan, we founded Invent in 2011. So that's, along the way, I started as an engineer and then I ended up doing major project BD. So just to give you a scale of that, if you take London, where most of the work was, some of the major projects in London, I had my fingers all over. So, the upgrade to Tottenham Court Road Tube, which was finished a few years ago.
Yeah.
I think the outturn cost was 600 million. Similar scale project at Victoria Station. There's the new, it was the platform relief scheme there, a similar sort of scale. The Western Tiggle at King's Cross Station, that was 300 and something million. The three-car project on the DLR, step-free access. Anyway, it goes on and on. That was really where the majority of the success had been at the time. And of course, we were working both with Transport for London and Network Rail, as in every.
Yeah.
So that was where I got this real experience about how to grow something that already exists. What I did before that was create a new business in a company called Cementation, which is now part of Skanska, which was a separate unit that used to fix railway cuttings and embankments. So we started that from scratch, and then of course when I started my own consultancy, I did it all again. So that's what I've done.
In terms of, I'm curious because I didn't actually realize you came from a civils background. I did as well. Um, how much of when you did that transition from running sites, running the operations to running business development in a firm, where how much of what you learned at kind of university in terms of engineering was applicable there, and if it wasn't much, or where did you get that knowledge of, how to kind of grow revenue and sell, build relationships and things like that?
But at the universities I went to, up to that point, my view is that the experience of going to university helps you learn about relationships. Because I don't know about your experience. My experience is you get thrown in a house full of 12 people from around the world. Most of them you don't like. You have to get on with it, don't you? And it is navigating those sorts of things, which I think is a very formative part of anyone's development. And I think so. At the point at which I transitioned from being in operations to full-time BD, it was entirely, it was like an offshoot of what had happened. So in terms of the education, yes, it was nothing to do with concrete technology or anything like that. But being away from home, being in a group of people from around the world and having to navigate all of that stuff, that was helpful. When it came to when I started in the construction sector, which was in the late 80s, it was a boom time. You're too young, but it was, it was the Thatcher boom, and it was the year of the yuppies, and everyone was very aggressive, and um, there was a comedy character called Loads of Money, all of this sort of stuff going on. Therefore,
Very infield.
the construction industry is extremely macho. I'm not saying it isn't now, but then it was almost a caricature of machismo. Um, Very, very aggressive, dominating. It would be called bullying or, you know, things like that now. But that was the way it was. And it was very, in the contracting game, but particularly in the big boy stuff, it was extremely contractual, in a very aggressive way. And so that was a bit of a formative experience. But on the other hand, I never felt comfortable with that because I always thought it was always a lose-lose mentality. And I suppose it was at that point that I saw there must be a better way of doing things. And yeah, personally, I don't want to do it like this, but I just don't think it's good business. That was what
Yeah.
I was thinking. So, and that's how I developed that business at Cementation, because it was something new that was almost gifted to the business. One of a big potential client. So we've got a really major problem. Can you come and help us? And of course, what it meant was doing a completely different scope to what the business was comfortable doing with it at the time. And on the other hand, so in that sense, that was completely relationship led at the time. And we managed to convince ourselves that we could do it, and we had to develop a whole load of new systems and processes to manage the risk. But by nurturing that relationship and actually performing for the client, eventually led to a new business stream, new skills, yada, yada, yada. And it was effectively a monopoly that we created. If you get the opportunity in life to do that, once you've done well. But of course, in a way, I sort of ran out of steam in that business, not through anyone's particular fault, but this was big. It was the tail was beginning to wag the dog, and you get political problems then in large organisations that people get resentful and also fearful. So I felt that I was not going to make too much further progress in the short term, and somebody headhunted me and said, "Well, fancy you're still in construction, you're going to still be in infrastructure, but now rather than working for a subcontractor, you're going to work for a main contractor. And by the way, they want you to get involved in much bigger things." So when I went to, it was Taylor Woodrow at the time, they said, "Well, we want a rail business." I said, "Really?" He said, "Have you got any strategy?" He said, person who was interviewing me said, "No, that's it. We want a rail business. We've sort of done the analysis. We think it's a good sector to get into." So, okay then. So eventually, after a lot of toing and froing, they gave me the job. And I did what, I'd recommend anyone do at the time. You spend the first few months talking to people, both internally and externally, about what the current capabilities were and what their aspirations were, all these sorts of things. And then there was 2 live projects that they had with 2 different immediate clients. And I went and spoke to them and a few other people. And after about, I don't know, I joined in November. So in early January, I said, right, I'm going to present our plan. You can imagine there's like 15, it was all men in those days, 15 men sat around the boardroom table, and I put this presentation. I said, this is the rail business strategic plan. So you've got 2 projects at the moment. They generate about 40 million turnover a year. But that's it. So this is the target. Within 5 years, you're going to be doing 100 million. It's an obvious target. Next slide perplexed them. So I said, we're going to ignore Network Rail. And everyone around the table said, no, we want a rail business. And it's 90% of the market. I said, I'm aware of that. You're not going to win any work. You're not going to win any work at all, because the current, not 5 years ago, the current experience you've got is entirely on London Underground infrastructure. And that's where I think we should focus our efforts. I said, what that actually means is we're not even going to fill out a PQQ. We're going to ignore it. So there's a big constant, you can imagine how that debate went. So they said, well, who is the client that you're going to target? I said, well, it's not London Underground, it's TfL. At that time, TfL was a brand new concept. It had only been launched a year or 2 before. Of course, it included London Underground, but it also included the Docklands Light Railway, Croydon Tram, yada, 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 right? And all the buses and what have you. So, we have this, to their credit, they just at the end of this meeting said, get on with it. And of course, then you really nailed your colours to the mast, don't you? But as I understood the market and what was coming, I was reasonably confident that we were going to do okay. And within, tenders started, we started doing some tenders, and I think maybe not the first, the second one we did, which was the enabling works from memory for the East London Line extension, comes in. We win it. Of course, it was one of those beautiful ones where the scope was so vague there was a license to print money if you know what you're doing. Hope, if any, they're all probably retired now, people that are contract. So we get this job, and at the time, the way to position Taylor Woodrow was, you guys are too young to know this, but there'd been a PPP on the underground, if you remember, where they had various consortia who had all of the work and they had to do it. One was called Metronet, it was tube lines, and politically, everyone was against them because they were seen as being profiteers, and it wasn't a success. And in particular, because the major part of it was Metronet, Balfour Beatty were getting a lot of flack. So I said to the team, that the way to make a success of what we've got is to offer ourselves as an alternative to Balfour Beatty. So we have to position ourselves that we've got the capability. And I said, with these two projects you've got, which are going okay, we should be able to do that. And secondly, our behaviours, I can tell you now, are more sympathetic, let's say, than at the time. Remember, this is a long time ago. Balfour Beatty were, because Balfour Beatty were the raging, snarling bull of machismo back in the day. And you can imagine how that manifested itself commercially. So that was what we did. It was very, very subtle. So it wasn't anything to do with documentation, really. It was about planting the seeds in the minds of the procurement people and the very senior people in various parts of Transport for London. And so we started getting more and more opportunities, and they all of a sudden, that enabling works package might have been 20 million start off. The next one that came in, I think it was like 200 million. And before, when we had sight of it, we knew it was coming, and we built a plan to bid it. And based on what I've been told, and my view was, I said, look, this is too much of a stretch for us to do on our own. We need a JV partner. And I spoke to various people and got a very credible JV partner who helped us do it. And when it went up, in big companies, you have all sorts of layers of governance before people are going to commit to something like that. It gets to this particular risk committee, and the guy who's the chairman of it just said, we're going to do it on our own. And anyway, so we did, and we bid it on our own, and we won it. That was a game changer for me, because up to that point, the biggest contract I ever won was 3 million. I think that was 208 or something.
Mm-hmm.
Really, after that, we never looked back. There's some even bigger projects came out. Some of the ones I mentioned, which are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions. Those were JV, not because of the scale on its own, but because there was a lot of tunnelling, which is another thing to bear in mind. So scale is important when you're formulating strategy. The other one, of course, is the actual work content, and in this case, major tunnelling works. We didn't feel comfortable subcontracting that. We wanted a joint venture arrangement because you share the risk more. So that was how that worked. So it was sort of strategic, lots of strategic thinking about relationships and how to position the business against the market, or how you position over the market. And then
I want to just get into that a little bit more, if I could, Tim, because that was a specific scenario, and I wonder whether you could, for the listener, summarize how they could apply that same level of thinking when they're looking at them against XYZ contractors in the market,
you're right.
And how
so it's a very specific example.
Create a blueprint essentially of what are those takeaways that they could extract, and I think that would be.
So let's take. We're talking about contracting. So
yeah,
when you need to think about two things if you're an owner of a business. One of them is, what capabilities have I got? So some of that would be technical, some of it would be contractual. What your supply chain is like, if you've got one, what plant you've got, what it is you feel comfortable doing. That's one thing. Second thing is geography. The third thing really is in terms of what your current relationships are like. So if you've got a completely blank sheet of paper, i.e. I don't know anyone. I mean, no one's like that. Everyone knows somebody. But if you're trying to position yourself in a new market, it is really difficult. Because in this game, you need relationships to win work. Well, no, having relationships to win work reduces risk. Because if you've got no relationships, the only thing that they can judge you on is paperwork and your price. That's the important thing, right? So we're talking about capability, what your actual capabilities are, what your supply chain is like, the geography, the scale. Scale is really important. And it's the scope of the projects that you think you can do. So you don't have to have a perfect match between capability and scope. If you haven't got a perfect match, how are you going to plug the gap? So I gave you an example of where we had a very large business, but at the point at which we were bidding these jobs, we didn't have internally the capability to deliver large scale tunnelling. So you've got two options in that case. We've got three, I suppose. You either subcontract it or you JV. The third option is pretty radical, go and buy a business, but unlikely to do that for one particular project. So those are the things you need to be really cognizant of. And some of them are easy to do. You could, in a workshop situation, you could find out what people's capabilities are and probably what their relationships are and what their geography is in an hour or two workshop. But so you can work out what it is you feel comfortable doing and what you think you can win and make a profit. Because I can tell you now, any fool can win work. It's very price sensitive what we do. Right? So that's the important thing. That's one start. That's what the entity, the firm, can do or should do and knows about itself. You then look into the market and say, well, what's the best fit for what we've got? So there's two parts to that. What is the absolute best fit? Oh, everything matches. But that isn't necessarily where the best profit lies. Because that probably means there's many other people that match it as well. I'll give an example on, I'm now again talking mega projects, so it may be hard to relate for people, but it's quite a good example. If you take the Crossrail project, which finished a couple of years ago, there were 6 major stations built, new ones in London or extensions to existing ones. And all of the great and good in construction were in consortia who are going to bid these. And when we were mapping out what we were going to do, we had people say to us, this one's the one we want, because they were thinking like engineers. In this case, it was Paddington. The reason people liked the look of Paddington was it was the most open site, lots of concrete, lots of steel, very little tunnelling. It appeals to civil engineers. At the other extreme was Whitechapel Station, which was unbelievably congested. It had so many constraints. It had about 3 different rail lines going into it. There was a school right next to it. It was clearly going to be a nightmare to build. And everyone said, we're going to really go hard for Paddington. If anyone ever says that, in a work-winning situation, you should be ringing the alarm bells every time. Because my analysis was, look, and there were shades of grey between those two, right? All the other stations, they were either more like Whitechapel or more like Paddington. But Whitechapel was clearly the most difficult. I said, that's the one that the others won't want. For the reasons you don't want it. So that's the one we should go for. I mean, when I say really go for, I don't mean reduce the margin. I mean put all the effort in to make sure we're certain of what the base cost is. Have a wonderful presentation, all the rest of it, and be realistic that the others are so competitive that we're probably not going to win. Not win at a margin that makes any sense. Guess what happened? That was the one that
Landed it.
was one, and it ended up being the most valuable one because its price escalated when all. I mean, because although there were obvious constraints, there was loads that no one knew about, and so it was a target cost. The target kept shifting and shifting and shifting, and that was reasonably predictable. I think it was clearly predictable that the others wouldn't want it. So that's a situation saying, okay, I know what I can do. What do the projects look like that I can do? And then from that, you need a big list or a group and say, well, okay, out of those, let's say there's 6. You don't really want to bid all 6 because bidding is time consuming and uses up resources. So you'd need to rank them in terms of business desirability, not I'm an engineer, that's what I want to build. Because most construction companies are run by people who get excited about building a project. You want those people being your project managers and project directors. You don't want them making decisions about which one to bid. You really don't.
You know,
So,
you outlined.
sorry.
You outlined these criteria. I'm just thinking, how does that match with? There's always this question of, do I take on more jobs that I like, or bigger jobs? Do I just level up, or do I just?
So it comes on to an important point. So when I said scale is important, it's important for a number of reasons. There's a big difference between a project manager who's used to running lots of small jobs and a project manager who can deliver Whitechapel Station, which ended up being about £1 billion. I mean, when I say that they are wired up differently, they both may have exactly the same qualifications, but one is used to dealing with much faster decision making over a wide area project, all of that sort of thing. The other guy can think very strategically and make decisions now which may not play out for 2 years. So to answer your question is, if your business is one that runs lots of small projects, that's fine. So to grow, you need to do more projects. So as you grow, you then need to think about how you're going to how you're going to govern those projects as you take on more and more project managers. Because if you remember, the start was it's all about relationships. The internal relationships are important as well, because the main mechanism for businesses in terms of risk management is relationships internally. How much do you trust the numbers that are put in front of you, which means how much do you trust the people who are creating the numbers? So as you build a business, you're going to be taking on more people. You end up taking on people you don't know, obviously. And therefore you have to build the governance, the culture and everything else to manage that risk. Now, it doesn't really matter fundamentally whether there are lots of small ones or a few big ones. You need something there, and you just need to sort those systems out and the governance systems to managed both. Because what we see a lot of with small businesses when they start in construction, and JP, you have seen this as well, you normally, the ones that grow well, we find, usually you have a partnership and you've got an indoors guy and an outdoors guy. Right? And the outdoor guy makes it happen on site, and you can imagine what they're like. They've got usually, once they've got a bit of success, you can almost guarantee they've got a Range Rover Sport, Black Edition, and they spend all week driving around sites, basically being a bully. Right? If you're going to put it in brass tacks terms, but making stuff happen. He needs to back up with an indoor guy who's good with a pen and is a good negotiator and can think strategically. And they make a great partnership.
I wanted to ask you, Tim, and I love that indoor guy, outdoor guy, the number of businesses you've just summarized there in terms of construction at that kind of early to mid stage of growth. You mentioned about the importance of a relationship if you're trying to get into a certain revenue stream or a sector that maybe you haven't got a foot in at the moment. And if you don't have that, then you're looking at the kind of price, the quality of your price, and the quality of your documentation when you're submitting a tender. Are you an advocate of, like, let's say you're new to a tender, you're the kind of outsider, to sort of be good in both, as in, you know, you're most competitive on price, plus your tender submission is the most detailed, or do you think it's actually, just to make it like a convincing argument for the client QSs and the architects, or do you think actually just hone in on one? And
very, very good question. So unless you've got a mug client, you can never be much off the pace of the price and win. When you get really good at it, you can always be 1% or 2% higher. And if they trust you more to deliver it, they go with you. But to take your point, excellence in bidding means having the correct price, one that you're comfortable with. Because what you can't, when you're doing a bid, there might be you might have 3 to 5 competitors that you're bidding against. Some of those might make a mistake and have the price too low. And there's nothing you can do about that other than be convincing in your presentation that you really understand it inside out. If somebody dips 10% below you and you've got a client who takes a very, let's say, simple view of the tender submissions, you're going to lose. Even if you've got exactly the right costs and you've got a reasonable margin on it, because someone else has made a mistake. So I would advocate that. I know in my career, at various times, you'd have people say to you, "Well, Tim, what's the success rate of our bidding?" And at one point it was something like 40%, and you get some macho CEO who comes up to you and says, "Well, why isn't it 100%?" Which is a sort of Big Bollocks, brainless question to ask somebody, because the answer is, if you want 100%, you tell me, we'll win 100%, and you'll be out of a job because you're going to lose a lot of money.
Yeah.
In actual fact, 40% is at the top end of where I think anyone should be, because you need to understand how, if you're always on the pace of the money, you're probably too cheap. You're leaving money on the table. If you're up against 4, to have 4 bidders on a public tender is normal. If you're winning more than 1 in 25%, you've got to be really careful in your own head. Is that because, we've got the best submission, we've got the best relationships, or is it because our price is too cheap? And that's
Yeah.
that's the counter. I mean, I'm an advocate of having it above 25%, but not 35 is probably better, right? Than 40.
You've actually reminded me of, and Arthur will know this as well because it's a client of ours. I won't mention who, but they find themselves in this situation where they've let, I think, relationship prioritize, and there's a kind of carrot and stick situation with the main contractor saying, "Oh, the next job's going to be bigger and bigger," but what we found is that they're keeping the cost low, with always the view to get that big job.
It's the oldest trick in the book, isn't it? Because the counter to that is if you force through this claim, you'll never work for us again. Right? And it's like toffee because people will keep going back to people who pay them. People will keep going back to people that deliver. You can have a row. They might put you on the naughty step for 6 months, but there's a shortage of people in this industry that come back. When people are saying, "I'll do this job, we'll sort it out the next one," unless you are really, really sure of the relationships and you believe them, and you've got reason to believe it, really believe it, it's much more likely it's just been turned over.
So is your, from a practical management sense of a situation like that, is it to actually stand your ground, or would you say actually perhaps try and find some other main contractors to reduce your reliance on them? So
Right. So there's a
because how do you manage that relationship? Because
right. No.
obviously it's
So
people, right?
here's the thing, right? You'll have done so. You come lots of construction businesses start because they've got a really good relationship with the main contractor, and it's usually, one person. They get a series of jobs and they get themselves going. Before they know it, they're doing 10 million a year. At that point, where you're employing people, you've invested a load of money in plant, all that sort of stuff, you've got serious costs going out every month. It's a very, very risky way of running a life to be reliant on one client. I mean, it's like chapter 2 of A-level business management. No one really wants to have more than 5% of their turnover with one client. In construction, it doesn't matter who you are. That's rarely true. That you'll find that the top client, even for big guys, might be 20-30% of their revenue. So if you have a falling out, or worse, they go bust, you are high and dry, aren't you? So in those situations where you've had a reliable level of work from one client, it might be all great. Your priority must be to find another one. Well, in fact, you want another 5 or 6, really. So that's where, in those criteria, the relationships, it becomes a business risk that it's concentrated in one firm. And it may well be concentrated on one person. That number of times we see that, it doesn't matter why you've got a really good relationship with the commercial manager on a certain level, and he keeps giving you repeat work because he knows you're not going to mess it. You're going to make him look good, right? You can say that I managed them well, and they perform all the rest of it, which is that's a perfectly reasonable thing. But that person only needs to retire, go under a bus, emigrate, move up north, whatever it is, and you're knackered, aren't you? And that's always the case. So if you take the business we're in now, I'm touching wood, we're fortunate. We've got over 100 clients now. And they're not all the same size, of course they are. We've got some which are much, much, much larger than others. But one of our key tenets was, when we started, we're going to start with who we know. It's an obvious place to start. What you know, who you know. That's how we started this business. Now we specifically look for people that we don't know. because all the people we know have either been a client, are a client, or have told us to get stuffed. Because we work, although we've got big networks, we've done that. So now we go outside of that network, and it's a different set of skills. But when you're starting, to make it easier for you, start with who you know, what you know, and work on that. That'll take you a long way. That'll take you a
I
long
think
way.
that there's a lot in that because it almost I think in a way you're sort of saying, by diversifying your client base, there just is less scarcity, so you're less likely to basically take it up the arse from a main contractor that's kind of stringing you along, because you kind of know you can always go somewhere else. Whereas there's a tendency there to kind of stick with what stick with just building and not doing the development side.
I mean, look at the people
yeah.
who relied on Carillion, the people who relied on what's the
ISG.
business called? SIG, yeah. That would have been dreadful for them. I mean, even if it's only 20% of your turnover, because that means they got 20% of your money as well, mate. So those sorts of situations are to be avoided. So you take us; we've had 3 of our clients go bust this year, which is to be predicted with what's happening in the marketplace. Right? It's a bit of a body blow. I mean, when I say they've gone bust, it's cost us 6 figures, but it's just like stubbing your toe. It hurts. It don't cripple you.
Yeah.
Because there's 100 others who haven't gone bust yet, and hopefully only a few more will. But that's how we built that business with that in mind, that we want and create all the systems so we can manage more and more clients. Because it allows you to grow, but it reduces that risk.
I think it's also important at some point to kind of get in the reps of getting new business, because people get into this kind of rut and this routine of, well, I'm just going to use my warm network. Oh, I'll get a referral from this guy, and there's no concerted effort to go, I need to get new business that is just cold, just completely cold business. Because as you said, once someone does go bust and you're desperate, you really do need one. You don't have any pipeline, you don't have any mechanism
Right.
for it.
So
You're just
like a
kind of
cold
like,
start, right? Yeah.
the worst decisions are made in construction. Actually, when people have got a business that they built up. Let's take a number. Let's say they're doing 30 million a year, 2.5 million a month. And they might be, to do that, they might be doing 5 or 6 projects. Well, so they've got 5 or 6 projects, and some of them are going to finish in 3 months, and some of them in 18 months. You need a pipeline of opportunity behind that at the very least is going to keep your resources busy, or you can envisage you're going to keep your resources busy forever. That's what you need to have. That's just a construct. And once you say, right, I need a pipeline that's going to keep giving me £6 million projects or whatever it is, total value, which are going to generate £500,000 or £250,000 turnover a month or something like that. Once you know what those look like, you then have to go and find them and say, well, there's the opportunities. You wouldn't put them in your pipeline straight away. You put them in a thing called a hopper. And then you start evaluating those, which are the ones that are the most attractive for us. And you might have those 5 or 6 filters that I mentioned earlier, and you score them. And if you get the ones with the highest scores, obviously currently the most attractive, but some of the others might be if you can improve the scores. So that might be, well, if we can find a joint venture partner, or if we can form a relationship with a reliable subcontractor or something like that. They're the ones we're going to go for. And then you start working on the relationships of the procurement side of the equation, right? If we don't know anyone, how do we get in to know them? Yeah, and you've mentioned a few. It could be a referral. It could be you go to a networking event. It could be whatever it is. You just cold call them. You send them an email. Whatever it is, you do something to get the conversation started. And then once you've done that, as soon as the absolute critical thing is you want to get in front of them informally over a cup of coffee or similar. Get to know them and they get to know you as a person. Because that starts to tick that relationship box. It also, if you think, I don't like this guy, girl, they're straight talking, saying one thing, I just don't believe them, then you just drop it, don't you? You don't have to walk into a lion's den when there's plenty of sheep pens over there, aren't there? That's what you want.
Yeah, it kind of comes
all of
again back
that,
to that scarcity thing, right?
It's two things. You have to look beyond the immediate and you need to think strategically. So the people who, and we see it all the time with quite sophisticated businesses, they just wait for the tenders to come through on the email or the portal or however it's delivered. And they just churn them. And we often find businesses, so these are businesses that perhaps been around 20 or 30 years. They've been successful, they've survived. You ask them what their success rate is, and you'd be astounded. 10%, less sometimes. And you ask them the question, well, how many people are usually on the bid list? They go 4 or 5. So how on earth do you only win 1 in 10? Because half of them you can't win. Can you? Because when they do win, the price is correct because they've got a business which is sustainable. See, so what you're saying is 90% of the bids you bid, people are doing it way below your price. Really? They'd all go out of business, wouldn't they? Because this isn't like, you often find these are okay businesses. You think, well, I could have a career with them, but they're not. They're not knocking the ball out of the park, but it's a sustainable, medium-sized business. So that's it. So people are not thinking enough. You go to them and they say, well, that's what we track all of the planning. Like an architect, we know what's coming up. We've got a list that we subscribe to Barber. I mean, as soon as you hear that, you go, right, turn your brain on next time, right? Because if you're doing what everyone else is doing, that's why you're at 10%. And then they'll say, oh yeah, but we do that, and you get 80% of our work is sort of what we call potatoes. It keeps the mortgaging being paid and all of that. But what we really want is these projects, and we don't get many of those. I said, well, why don't you do some stuff to try and get more of that?
Yeah.
But we bid that the same way as we bid the other stuff. I said, no, if you know precisely, because they could tell you within a radius of 2 square miles the projects they want. Go out and find them before they hit the market. You have to do some work before the tender arrives. But then you wouldn't
I
have to
want
do more
to,
tenders.
Tim, can I move the conversation a little bit onto once you've got some form of relationship with a let's say it's a client or a potential client, and I think you're in a good position to talk about this because I know a lot of your clients are architects. And I also know you're sort of a fan of using the CRM and things to kind of maintain relationships. How do you suggest, like, other than just repeatedly emailing people saying, have you got any work, like maintaining a good relationship to kind of be considered, and perhaps even doing kind of early contractor involvement, engagement type jobs where maybe you're bypassing a tender process entirely and actually, if that's actually exists. But do you know what I mean? Being kind of the contractor of choice of an architect or a development company or something like that.
Right. So the key to it is you need to start a conversation. And by a conversation, I really mean ideally you want to get in their office for a cup of coffee. At a push, it could be like this, or somewhere neutral, like a coffee shop or a cafe or something. And ideally, you want to have a conversation with them, which they don't believe at that stage is a sales meeting. It's got to be another reason to meet you, even if they suspect it's a sales meeting. So, one of the skills that people need to develop as BD people is how do you get someone's interest and agreement to a meeting when, if you're an architect, they get hammered by every single doorknob manufacturer, glazing company, carpet company, anyone. They want their product specified, right? So they spend a lot of their time because they need to know this stuff anyway. So that's it, right? They do meet these people. But sometimes if you can get to know a few architects and understand what their real concerns are with contractors in their niche or their area, that could be that's an opening gambit. If you don't know anyone, that's why networking, I would advocate, can be very effective. But it's a bit like what's the word? It's a combination of farming and hunting, right? So with hunting, you've got a very specific target. So if you know exactly who your target is, like a particular architect, then you can perhaps start doing some work to understand where you might meet them. Serendipitously. Or if you don't, then you need to go to places where you're going to find a lot of architects milling around, businesses and things like that. But you become quite skilled at making something look a coincidence, and of course it isn't. There's ways of doing it. But the thing with networking is, it takes energy and time, and it's not linear. So you could do networking for months and find it very hard to put a return on it.
So, Tim,
I
can imagine right now, there's a contractor out there listening to this in his car, probably thinking, "Fuck! Like, please ask him." Yes, that sounds all good, like being able to get an architect on a meeting without it being a sales, but can you give us some practical, like, what would that actually look like without giving maybe away your trade secrets? How do you make a meeting that looks random but actually be very targeted? And as an example, what would you say to an architect or whoever? How would you take them? What would you say to get them to agree to a coffee shop meeting or a posh breakfast, as you like to put it?
Well, there's two things. So I'll tell you a few of the tools that we've used over the years. Some of them don't work as well as they used to. I found if I met someone at a networking event and he was male, and I'll explain why it works. It'd be obvious why it doesn't work so well with females. But if he was a male, I'm good at breaking the ice, good at sort of making people feel slightly interested in what I've got to say. And then I say, why don't we continue the conversation over posh breakfast? When you're free next week, right? Because the thing about a breakfast for a man is it starts, it doesn't take much of your day, does it? You're not in the office, you're on a third party place, he's going to treat you to it's probably 30 quid breakfast now, no alcohol. It's completely unthreatening. once he agrees to that, you got him for an hour, right, when you can really get to know him. But what I found is you have to be very careful with women because it can sound like a come on, can't it? And therefore it can be interpreted as being a bit forward. So it's not as effective. Doesn't mean I haven't had breakfast with women, but female, it just is clearly not as effective. So that's one idea. Right, wherever you are, why don't we bump into something earlier? Oh, we haven't got time, whatever breakfast. So it's 8 till 9, egg and bacon, whatever they want. In your case, it'd be squished up.
Tofu and tofu.
But that's it. 9 o'clock, they're going to the office. They haven't really taken anything out of their working day. They arrive, they're hungry, they're quite pleased to be sat down and have something, and you've had an hour of their time. And you can probably get a follow up. Because, oh, you were interested in that? When I come and see you in a couple of weeks. Right. As we've gone on, we've got more sophisticated. So we still do all of that stuff. But like you, we've got a podcast. So we invite people on the podcast. They come to our office. It's flattering. Of course, the great thing with the podcast is, we've because we've been doing it for a few years now, you've got data that you can back up. So when you come on a podcast, we get 10,000 views, which is true. It's all there on YouTube, Podbean and all that. So, there's two ideas, sort of an old-fashioned, an old school idea and a more new school idea. But there's lots of ways. And what I'd say to your listeners is you need to think, you've got to be authentic. Yeah, so we had a podcast series called The Construction Big Breakfast, which we ran for 4 seasons. Because as our business diversified, we had to change the title because it didn't work because we were also in fashion. But that we created a whole thing around breakfasts. So we were doing them regularly. And we'd done 3 days a week. I'd be doing a posh breakfast, and then we'd have this podcast, get other people coming on talking about construction matters, but the whole theme of the way the intro and the outro, you can all see this stuff if you go back in time on our YouTube channel. We had an animated intro of assembling a traditional English breakfast, and the theme, the pretense of it was the first question we always asked everyone: "What do you have for breakfast?" Because you get people who said, "Oh, nothing." It's not that you didn't know I was going to answer that question. But that was quite effective as well, and it is part of reinforcing the brand. The brand was all about breaking bread, albeit at breakfast time with people, and we found that effective. But when we diversified I'll tell you now, it's a pretty big turn off in the fashion industry. So we have to change the title.
What would you say? What would you say to someone that just says, "I don't have time for that"? Like, because that's something we hear all the time. I just don't have time.
Yeah, that's a common thing about people who don't think strategically. I haven't got time. It's a bit like I'm trying to think of a really simple example. If you say you've got a repetitive task and you do it every day. So I'll give you an example of what I do. I spend a lot of my time researching prospects. I used to literally do all the homework, and I'd write notes either in a notebook or even worse on the back of a scrap paper. I'd do what I had to do, and it was lost. So it took a lot of time, and most of that was then lost because I either hadn't recorded it in a way that was I could keep. So if the prospect came back, I then have to do all the research again. I mean, when I'm explaining it to you, it sounds completely insane, but this is what everyone's like to a degree. We invested in Copilot Pro quite recently. So I thought there's got to be a better way of doing this. So I actually spent a bit of time working out all the information that I would normally ask myself and go and gather it. And I wrote a massive prompt. Put in Copilot, copy, paste, hit the button, bam. There's all the information. Then there's a button on Code. Well, it's disabled at the moment, but it'll be reinstated shortly. You can download that into a Word document. So you've got a Word document, you can put it on our CRM system. So all of a sudden, we've now got a systemized way of doing something that creates value, because that data is valuable. It's then in our CRM system so the rest of the team can see it. And it took about 1/50th of the time. But to do that, I had to do some strategic thinking, think about what I was doing. And I've come up with something that you could easily say has made the company more valuable because we're going to be more effective. I'm going to be more effective. So the people who haven't got time is you will never, ever move forward unless you make time to think strategically. It's impossible. So if you're just doing the sausage machine, you're going to be turning that handle forever. And you're going to get the same chipolatas coming out at the end of it, or whatever the vegan equivalent is. That's it. Unless you think, actually, I'm going to think about putting an electric motor on this. And then the big problem would be getting enough product to put in the top of it, because it's going to run through what we've got at the moment. You then start thinking strategically, and all of a sudden you've got your wall sausages, aren't you? And you're making millions of them. But you can't do it just by going, I'll just make sausages like this. It doesn't matter what you do. It's always the same. So that strategic thinking is you've got to set yourself some targets. So if you've got one client keeps giving you work, great. You know where your breakfast's coming tomorrow, don't you? Next month. You don't know where it's going to come in 2 years' time. You really don't. And you might be living on a bowl of gruel rather than eggs Benedict.
I wanted to ask you, Tim, because I know we're running a little bit tight on time, but you have your podcast, Innovation Deciphered, and you spend a lot of time talking to people on the kind of forefront with AI and technology. Can you give us your kind of thoughts on exciting technology? You mentioned, essentially ChatGPT, Copilot as a sort of source of getting information, but in a construction, main contractor, subcontractor sense. What sort of technology innovations can you sort of see really making a kind of big impact in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years?
Well, I'm going to ask you a counter question first. What do you mean by impact? Because obviously we've watched technological developments, watched my entire career. Everyone is looking for a silver bullet that's going to improve the margin. Right? And you'll see every company that has got a publicly facing strategy, there will be something in there that says we're doing something to improve our margin. And sometimes it's technological, sometimes it's to do with governance, as I already mentioned, going into new markets, dropping out of the market, all this stuff. There is no technology that's going to be adopted by the construction industry that will improve its margin. I'll tell you that now. No matter what it does for efficiency. So if you were asking me about efficiency or improvements to quality or things like that, I'll answer it. I think it's an important note to everybody that technology which you can buy will not, it might give you some advantage for a few months, but if it does, your competitors will be compelled to buy it as well. And they will catch up. So, I've mentioned we're probably slightly ahead of the curve on Copilot. and some other AI products. But our competitors will catch up. But they will. I mean, it's not me saying, oh, yeah, they're going to go out of business. Some of them might, but I can't stop Microsoft selling it to them because they're going to try. And they'll use me as an example, won't they? Obviously. And that's true of all of the technology in construction, whether it's to do with clever, I mean, we know people who are doing very clever things on scheduling, AI, but they are a tech business that's decided to focus in construction, rightly or wrongly, that's what they're doing. And once they've got it proven that it works, and they've got a case history that says this took away some risks, this did that, and they're making more money, say, which will be whatever the case history is, that's what it'd be saying, that everyone else would do it. They'll sell it to everyone else.
Tim, speak to, again, the kind of owner operator that's hearing, AI every second word, hearing about everything changing. Would you sort of say, just keep doing what you're doing, or would you say, like, actually start listening to things and find out about the technology? Do you think, I don't know, leave it a few more years? Like, what would your advice be?
In terms of AI, if you take the basic stuff like your Office suite, from what I've seen, get Copilot tomorrow, Copilot Pro, and start, I should say, playing with it, working out how to use it, go on a few courses. Because it will make a big difference to your efficiency. It will. So my people are more efficient in what they do using it than they were before. It's manifestly obvious. So in terms of that kind of thing, absolutely. In terms of the things that get lots of noise, off-site manufacturing, modular construction, and of that ilk. Problem with the businesses that actually deliver that stuff rather than the users of it, they've found the problem they don't understand is the nature of the construction market. Because those are basically, to make money, they are factories. They are making sausages. And the problem with construction is demand varies massively and very quickly. So if you take, I had a friend of mine who worked for Mars Bars for a long time, from Korea. Massive business, Flock's chocolate. They know they sell slightly less in the summer and they sell more around Christmas. But it's to do, there's two influences. One is population and the demographics of population, and the other is attitude towards consuming sugar. Recessions don't make much difference, right? So they know within a few percent what they're going to sell each year in terms of demand. So they might have some problems and what have you, but they know where the demand is. In construction, if the chill winds of a recession are felt, construction workload could drop from 1 week to the next. So you'll hear this with architects. There's some economic shock and they'll get a call at lunchtime on a Friday saying, down tools tonight, send us your final bill. And that's it. They always feed it first. Next people are the ground workers, the scaffolders. People feed it last to the M&E contractors. They're there at the end of the projects. So people who've got factories set up and it's just for construction projects, and obviously off-site manufacturing is exactly that, they always find it hard to keep the volume at a economic level for that reason. And it's also very capital intensive, whereas construction isn't. If you're a contractor, very different sort of business, and it's not the construction market isn't well suited to that kind of production line business model, which is where Egan was wrong. In his Egan report, he thought we should be more like automotive.
Not a big advocate of off-site manufacturing then.
No, I can see the benefits of it. I'm saying from a business point of view, I wouldn't invest in it.
Mm-hmm.
for those reasons.
What do
You know,
you?
it's nothing to do with quality of management or the idea or the technology. It's the volatility of the demand, which they can't fix.
I'm just curious, from your view of big businesses and small businesses. Do you think that as the bigger companies adopt more of this technology, it's going to be harder for the smaller guys to catch up? That's kind of a lot of what I'm hearing. I don't know. I work a lot with in AI space as well, and that's generally the thought of like once the massive companies adopt this stuff and they have their own trained models, etc. But then the smaller companies are more agile. So just wanted to
The
know your
problem
thoughts on that.
with, if you think about it, construction companies, the big ones, their business model essentially is contractual arbitrage. So they take a contract from a client, they subcontract 80% of it to their supply chain, and they make their money out of the arbitrage between what they get paid and what they pay their subcontractors. And to do that, they do what's known in management speak as systems integration. That's the risk they take. There are others as well, but so they're perhaps putting in 15 to 20% of the value of the project, which is high level management and procurement. They take 100% of the risk. They offset 80% of it downwards, and they try their best to get more money out of the client. That's the key part of the business model. There's another part which is more relevant now, which is also billing the client early and delaying payments to the subcontractors. You therefore generate cash. You can get a return on the cash now. You couldn't for 10 years, but you can now. That business model, unless they are developing their own AI to manage contractual arbitrage, all they're doing is buying products which are available to everybody else. If they are developing their own product to manage contractual arbitrage, let's say they did that, they invest a load of money, they've got this new product. It would be more valuable to them if they sold it to their competitors or spun that business off and gathered hundreds of millions for that than it would be to keep it in house. That's a fact.
Yeah.
So I don't. People are saying that, but I don't agree with them. I don't know. They thought it through. They don't understand the essence of what a contractor is, and so that's what I think.
I think we could talk for a long time with the integration and the technology side of construction, as I think is an interesting space. And obviously, Tim, you spend a lot of time in that kind of innovation. But I really, we have to wrap it up somewhere, and I think this would be a good time for us to wrap this conversation up. To anybody that is listening, that is interested in kind of what's happening more on that sort of forefront, what kind of technology is coming in, how it's being integrated into not only construction but other industries. I highly recommend Invent's actual in-house podcast, so Innovation Deciphered. Tim, if any of the main contractors or subcontractors are interested in finding out a little bit more about what Invent do and the services they provide, is the website the best place to go to?
Website's the best place. Or you can message me on LinkedIn, whatever suits you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tim.